All right, so we're back. This is episode 2 of, I guess, what we're tentatively calling the Fantasy Elect podcast, but I think we're gonna have to come up with some sort of
Yeah.
cool name for it.
Yeah, I was Googling a bunch of names, and frankly, they all sucked. But yeah, I mean, it needs something catchy and fun, because this will be catchy and fun.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Do you want to just quickly? You're Chris. I'm Justin. Anything you want to say as an intro of yourself? Please, by all means.
Yeah. No. I'm Chris Matola, and I've been working in politics since 1980. As hard as that is to believe, I didn't plan it like that, but I guess lack of planning, and here I am. And I've done 7 governors, 11 U.S. senators, 7 presidential campaigns, and more scar tissue than I care to admit. And I think that one of the fun things about technology and one of the fun things about where we are right now as a culture is that we can kind of take ideas and transfer them back and forth, and they become incredibly popular. And I think, political betting, treating politics like fantasy sports, is going to be hot, and it's going to be what everybody wants to do. We used to say the greatest participation sport in America, isn't football, it's politics. I mean, you've got maybe 2.
Yeah.
You think about it. We probably have 2 national, maybe 3 national sports channels. ESPN, Fox Sports 1, and NBC Sports. But you probably have 8 channels that are dedicated to politics. Right?
For sure.
So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and what I love is it's a sport where there's no points for participation. And it's winner takes all, and it's I think if it could be, people would choose for it to be to the death. So it's it really taps into like the most primal aspects of us, which I think is kind of fun in a way.
Yeah.
All right, you're Chris. You have all this experience. And have seen the inside. You've seen where the sausage is made, and haven't lost your appetite completely. I am an outsider. I'm not a inside the beltway, inside politics guy, but certainly love the game of it and the sport of it. And it's just entertaining, right? So we might as well have some fun with it, I think is the point. And maybe in the process, learn some stuff too, right? Like.
Yeah, one of the great I was talking about a meeting before we got on the air here about a meeting I had where people who were political insiders were absolutely self-delusional about a particular race, and I think that politics, unlike say business investing, unlike playing professional sports, politics is the only thing where an intelligent amateur can become an overnight meaningful success, and that was certainly true of my career. I mean, I had no real background in politics, but I seem to have a facility for it. I seem to have a facility for understanding data, and here I am, 40 some years later. But I think what's interesting about Fantasy Elect is that you will see how smart you are. And if you are smarter, and I guarantee you will be smarter than people you see on cable talk shows and on news and on political podcasts. Because, the great thing about, when you listen to experts, you just see how wrong they are over and over and over again. And then they pretend like they never got it right or never got it wrong, I mean, and you don't have to be a genius. You can go back just very quickly to 2016 Trump, who was going to get slaughtered in the Republican primary, and then he was going to get slaughtered by Hillary. And then Joe Biden, who was called, dead, months before Iowa. and his campaign was in shambles. And if you just can go back to the newspaper archives and just look at that stuff, and it's hysterical. And you see the same names, the same voices back then that are telling you what's going to happen now, and they're wrong. And again,
Dewey defeats Truman.
Yeah, I mean, this is fun because you get to kind of pick your brain and but anyway, I was talking about this thing I had in Arizona where people were absolutely in denial, and people don't want to dispassionately look at the data. I mean, if you have your favorite team, if you love the Los Angeles Rams, or if you love the New York Yankees, they can do no wrong, and you delude yourself about what your reality is and what the possibilities are. And that happens at the highest level of politics. And the fun thing about Fantasy Elect is you can see if you're going to fall trap and you're going to trap yourself into that. Gee, I really like Kristen Sinema, or I really like Ron DeSantis, or I really like Gavin Newsom, and therefore I'm going to be delusional about what their actual probabilities are.
Right. The interesting thing is going to be like when we take some of the delusion away for people, the question is, if you would not put money on them to win, will you still vote for them? That's the question that I'm so curious about. I'm not willing to put a $50 entry fee and draft them on my team, but I'm still going to vote for them.
Yeah, and that is, what's interesting. What we've seen, we both played, fantasy sports, and at a certain point, if you're drafting and you've got a favorite player, and you see him in like the second round, and he's probably a fifth round pick, and you go, "Oh, it's my favorite player. I'm going to pick my favorite player," and and then week 4, he's giving you 3 points a week. And you think, why did I pick this putz?
Right.
But I think people are going to do the same thing with politicians. Oh, I really like,
for sure,
this guy or that guy.
It's 100% true.
And that's fun. That's
awesome. It is, right? And that's kind of the whole point, is that if you are going to be good at playing odds, you have to understand human nature, right? You don't discount it. You don't pretend like it doesn't exist. You acknowledge it and you use it to your advantage. So he or she who can do that the best is going to win a pretty penny on Fantasy Elect,
Yeah, I have a friend who is a professional gambler. He's a professional card player, and he makes a living for him and his family by literally traveling around the world and playing cards. And we kind of had a discussion that he kind of thinks like what I do is amazing. You travel around the country and you actually do campaigns, and that's how you make a living. And I'm like, yeah, it's dumb, right? And I said, but to travel around the world and play cards and betting yourself against your ability, I said that is like, and it's kind of the same thing, in kind of a fun way. But again, the idea of what is your insight into our culture? What is your insight into our politics? And we're overwhelmed with, half a dozen or more TV station, cable stations, networks that are consumed by politics, and everybody on there is an expert. And then, there's podcasts, newspaper, and, what I find, and why I find what we're doing is so interesting is that the average person on the street has a much better grasp on politics and reality than most consultants and virtually all journalists, because they're on ground zero. And so here's a funny thing today that I was on Twitter, which I spent too much time on, and there was a post, and not to pick on Gavin Newsom, but there was a post from Gavin Newsom about, isn't it great that Thanksgiving is so much cheaper now than it was before Biden got in office? And, and the way we do these things, and I've done them for people, is that you kind of do what fun factoid can I do? And so it seems real and defensible, and you put it, but they didn't calculate the price of turkeys right. And, in 2020, price of turkey, was like 89 cents, and now it's like $1.29 for a 20-pound turkey, which is about a 67% increase. And so somebody in his office, I guarantee you, whoever in his office put that together has not been to the store and has not shopped for a turkey. I guarantee you, Gavin Newsom, the last time he was turkey shopping was never. But the average person reads that and goes, "Are you an idiot? I know what this is."
Right.
And right. And so
Well, what they were doing is they were adjusting for inflation. There's been so much inflation that he's right. They are the same price.
yeah, right. And you kind of
It's
go
just
like,
we've had a 67% inflation.
right. And so so the point of it is, if when, and again, not to pick on him, but Gavin Newsom goes on a CNN and he pontificates about how the election is going to turn out, and he's so out of touch, he doesn't know what the average person is going through. The average, person who just came back, on Saturday from Ralph's, and was like going, "Geez, price of the turkey is really high," and it's like they will have a better idea of what's going on in the world, than the governor of the state of California or the governor of the state of Colorado or Texas, or pick one. But I mean, and that's what's so fun about this. That's what's going to be so fun about this, playing this game.
Was it Jason Chaffetz that was on Fox the other day and said that he bought a turkey for $90 though, and they did the math, and that turkey would have had to weigh like 80 pounds or something like that? They were running the number.
Stupid stuff. Stupid stuff.
Yeah, again, But what Jason Chaffetz realized is that he wasn't speaking in reality. He was just speaking in the way people feel, right? Like it feels like it's $90 just for a Thanksgiving dinner now, whether or not that's reality or not, right? So you can be hyperbolistic in your language about what's true or not true, as long as it's not under what people are feeling, because then you're discounting how they feel. You can go over it. You can be like, "Oh, isn't it so tough on people right now?" Because people feel that it's tough. And you can be wrong in the actual amount to the degree of toughness, but you can't be wrong and say it's not as tough as you think, right?
Right. There is a political thing, a political axiom that if you tell people something untrue, it doesn't matter what true thing you tell them. I'm in Los Angeles right now, and if I started this podcast with saying, you said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Great, we've got a foot of snow outside," and it would be something fundamentally untrue. And if you lived in Los Angeles, you would say, "This guy's full of shit, and I'm not going to believe a word he says." So when a politician says stuff has gotten cheaper, you say, "I know it hasn't gotten cheaper." And again, it's
right.
They're arguing, this little fact, when overall is how people judge. Did I go to the grocery store? Did I spend more or less than I did last year? I spend more. It's more expensive. It's not cheaper.
Right.
And what it does is that kind of cheap point making by the politician undermines their credibility on something else.
Totally.
And again, and a lot of it's from perspective. I think it might have been Mo Udall, or I forget what politician said, a recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. Right.
Right.
And again, but again, I think that, but the Chaffetz thing is the other end of this, and again, when's the last time Chaffetz bought a turkey? Do these guys even know where the supermarket is? Right.
Right. I love that. Okay. It's so great that we started off with Thanksgiving, because here we are the day before Thanksgiving. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the political arguments around the table with their aunts and their uncles, or whoever the case might be. Here's a couple of stories I thought would be good points to argue about over the table. I pulled out a few stories from the week. My first one, and these are not in any particular order of like what's most important, but I do feel like the X, formerly known as Twitter, and the Media Matters lawsuit is a great one that people will be arguing about. What I love even more, maybe because I'm in Texas, is that now Ken Paxton, who survived
Yeah.
the potential of losing his
Jail.
job in that
Jail.
debacle. Yeah. Although I think there's still a federal lawsuit or a federal investigation into him, isn't there? It's
There
been
is.
going on for half a decade now. But he has now decided to open an investigation into Media Matters because they may have done something bad to Elon and X. What's your hot take on this story? Is there, I guess, first, do you think Elon and X have a chance of winning, or?
Yeah, let me get coffee because this requires caffeination. So here's what I think is the kind of the interesting thing about this. I really think a lot of it depends upon. I think filing the lawsuit in Texas is probably pretty smart. Again, there's another axiom that says it's better to know the judge than know the law, and I think potentially going into a friendly venue, literally judge shopping, benefits Musk. I did read the X lawsuit. I found it very convoluted, and as near as I can tell, what they're accusing Media Matters of doing is creating a bunch of accounts and constantly refreshing the account. When they get a bad ad or they get something horrible next to their account, taking a screenshot of it and then going around saying, "Look, all you're up against Nazis and stuff." And so 2 points to that. It is fundamental manipulation, and it's really like running a negative ad. And it's like running, Media Matters running a negative ad against Musk. And as far or X, and as far as I can tell, there's no law against that. Right? As long as they were, the question is, were they transparent in other conversations that that's what they did? Because it's also undeniable that there's really kind of some terrible, content on X, because it's I think Musk described it as like an ocean of information, and Media Matters described it as a flowing sewer, but you've got sewage in the ocean, so I think both are correct. But again, I think that the open manipulation makes it disingenuous. And you can find craziness on Reddit, on TikTok, on Instagram. You can find all kinds of Nazi stuff. Media Matters is kind of an interesting thing. You know about the founder of Media Matters?
No, I have no idea.
This is really good. This is actually so Media Matters was founded by Democratic national money, but the founder of it was a guy named David Brock. And David Brock was famous for being a right-wing provocateur. And if you look at the pictures of David Brock, he's this kind of wild-looking guy with this big shock of white hair that he used to comb straight up. And not that there's anything wrong with having white hair, but he famously wrote a book called The Real Anita Hill. And it was about Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas, because Justice Thomas is also in the news. And Hill was a lightning rod for your politics back in the 80s. And it was an evisceration of Hill. And I think he was the one that described her as a little bit nutty, a little bit slutty. But anyway, so he was, so David Brock was this kind of famous, feted on Fox and in the right wing influence sphere. His next book, which was very heavily promoted and waited for, I think was called The Real Hillary Clinton. And it came out, and it was pretty fair. But I mean, it's been decades since I read it. But you read it, and there were no bombshells. There were no, she was kind of a generic politician and kind of generic wife of a president, and that was kind of it. And people turned on Brock. because they had wanted this vicious takedown, this kind of Anita Hill-like destruction of Hillary, and didn't happen. And so all of a sudden, Brock fell out of fashion. And I think it was a New Yorker profile. It was something where it talked about how hurt he was because I'm doing this from memory, but it was like that he was no longer in fashion and no longer got good invites to good parties. And then, but more importantly, all of a sudden now David Brock finds himself out of a job. And he can't get project started or project funded because everybody's so disappointed. So he becomes a Democrat. And he gets funding for the same kind of, and if you look at the kind of the Media Matters opposition stuff, and I have no idea if he's still actively involved in it, but the kind of the traditional Media Matters thing, it's all gotcha stuff. It's nothing really fundamental. And the Anita Hill book was kind of all gotcha stuff. And that, and
I saw on Twitter the other day that his, I hope I'm correct in this, but his partner is the owner of the pizza joint from Pizzagate in DC. Is this right?
I don't know, but oh my God, yeah.
I don't know. Listen, in that statement that I just made, I'm saying that the gentleman is gay, which may or may not be. This is what I saw on Twitter.
David Brock is gay.
Okay.
Or was gay.
So his partner is apparently the owner of is it Cosmo Pizza, I think, in DC, where the Pizzagate thing happened in 2016 or 15, 17. So I just love the way it all comes together. I especially love that that he decided to revive his career by becoming a Democrat. It's really just whoever's going to pay the bills, I guess, ultimately.
Yeah, I mean,
what I find interesting is that it isn't just the lawsuit now in Texas, which is fine, but it's now the Attorney General of Texas is opening a criminal investigation into the Media Matters. I think that's a bit of a reach, but maybe Texas is a very safe place where we don't have real crimes. It's interesting.
Most of the crimes are coming out of the Attorney General's office. I mean, it's like, by the way,
maybe.
Which is and he's part of a long string of corrupt Texas Attorney Generals. There was, and I'm going to forget the name now, but there was a famous Democrat Attorney General who actually ran for governor in 1990. Gosh, what was his name? But he ran against the first woman governor of Texas, Ann Richards. He ran against Ann Richards.
Oh, Ann Richards.
And
so she obviously defeated him in that gubernatorial race.
Right. In the primary. Yeah. In the Democratic primary.
Oh, okay.
And the great point of it was, and Ann Richards was a recovering alcoholic. She had a drug problem and stuff. And in the middle of this debate, the Attorney General candidate attacks Ann Richards for being, an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she had been waiting for that. And so she turned to him and she said, "I've been sober for 10 years. Can you say you've been honest for 10 years?" And that was the sound.
That's a good line.
And that was the soundbite that just absolutely destroyed him. I can't think of what his name is now. But anyway, but you can,
they prepped her well for that, didn't they?
Yeah. Molly Ivins was famously the writer, and I think Molly Ivins had a Pulitzer for commentary. But she wrote most of Ann Richards' stuff. And the famous Ann Richards line that she did in, I think it was the 1988 Democratic Convention, that Ann Richards said George Bush was born with a silver foot in his mouth. And that Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did except backwards and in high heels. But there were Molly Ivins writings.
That there should be a book of her quips. I like those.
I mean, there's a couple really good books, and Molly Ivins was also I think was an alcoholic, and And I almost say she met Richardson rehab or something. But anyway, but it's, again, fascinating people.
I'm hanging out in the wrong places. Apparently, I need to be hanging out in rehab.
Well, no, yeah, no. Well, Austin is, you're hanging out in the right place. Austin. I mean, it's a happening.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
All right, so that's X versus Media Matters. Which, by the way, I don't know. What annoys me is now every time somebody says X, they have to say formerly known as Twitter. Well, let's just leave it at Twitter, because all of this, they aren't Prince, okay?
Yeah, right. And I don't know anybody that calls it that.
I know. And what do you call the verb of when you send something on X? Are you Xing? What are you doing?
I X'd.
How do you take such an established brand and then decide to turn it upside down?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. I mean, yeah. So anyway, I don't think, I don't think that the lawsuit amounts to much. And I think the advertisers will come back. Because there's not enough.
Ultimately, I don't know about these things. I'm not a branding person particularly, but I actually think he's making it harder for the advertisers to come back, or at least extending how long they're going to be gone, because he's giving more oxygen to the fire. That's the way I see it. It's like, okay, and it's not like they said anything that wasn't already the perception. This goes back to your Gavin Newsom example.
Mm-hmm.
The perception is you're allowing right-wing extremism to be openly aired on your platform.
Mm-hmm.
And you do it in the name of freedom of speech,
mm-hmm.
but when we use our freedom of speech to say something, you now want to silence us with the courts. I just think it plays so poorly in the political relations side. I don't know if there's a case or not, whatever. I'm not a lawyer, but from a perspective, if I'm going to advertise, if I'm Disney, I'm certainly not going to do it while there's an active lawsuit about this thing going on. I'm going to wait, Whereas I may not have waited as long if it had gone away.
There was a very famous, the jazz critic for the Village Voice was a guy named Nate Hentoff, who was a fascinating person, lovely writer. But he also wrote a lot about politics, and he wrote a lot about censorship. And he's got a famous book that's called Free Speech for Me, but Not for Thee. He said, being a censor is the world's second oldest profession, and it's got a lot in common with the first oldest profession. And basically Hentoff's warning was, watch out for people who say they are absolute free speech people, and watch out for people who want to be disinformation experts, and watch out for people who want to codify what is acceptable and what isn't. And Hentoff said it's speech is ugly and brutal and necessary, and you kind of have to live with it.
Yeah. That's definitely an argument that's always the freedom of speech argument. I hear people make it, and people who are making the freedom of speech argument, in my mind, seem to always be arguing against other people's freedom of speech.
Yeah.
They're saying they're protecting freedom of speech by talking about how woke people shouldn't be saying what they're saying. And my point is, like, why not? You can say what you want to say. They can say what they want to say. I think we're all, hopefully we're all grown up enough to choose which side we want to be on, or not on any side, but it doesn't seem that they're infringing on your freedom of speech by using their freedom of speech.
Yeah. And again,
we're having our Thanksgiving conversation now.
Right. And I do think that people, I think the disinformation correction industry is really dangerous, especially because it comes mostly from people who have huge platforms. And, and so when the government wants to say this is a misinformation, or NBC News wants to say this is disinformation. I find that very dangerous because literally they have a bigger megaphone. And if something is disinformation, there are legal remedies to that. When people always want to, my business, political advertising, people always want to say, we need people to regulate and we need, their academics or a fact check or some bullshit like that that'll regulate this. And I always make the case. I say, okay, so here is the argument. I'm going to say it's more expensive. We'll go back to our turkey thing. A 20-pound turkey is almost a 20-pound turkey is almost 70% more expensive since Joe Biden's been in office. Or, thanks to Joe Biden, your Thanksgiving is cost less than half of what it did a few short years ago. Both of those are defensible facts. And so, the idea that you're going to have somebody weigh in saying, well, this is true and this is false is absurd. Or saying, a lot of times the fact check industry does a lot about whataboutisms. Or there's not enough context in it. Of course there isn't enough context in it. I mean,
right.
You could argue that there's not enough context in the, in the Constitution, for Christ's sake, which is why you've got a Supreme Court to interpret it, and why the Founding Fathers wrote, the Federalist Papers wrote hundreds of pages about what it means and to supply context. And even with all that, and it's not like it's a long dead language. It's a fairly short historical epoch ago, where we know what they meant because they wrote it at the same time you have a Supreme Court to try to decide, well, this is what they really meant. And so the idea that
right.
Some dude sitting in a cubicle somewhere is going to decide what is true and what is false is absurd, and it's dangerous, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, there's one I'm really excited about. This is the last thing, because I know people are going to talk about this around the Thanksgiving table if they're going to get into political arguments. Joe Biden had his birthday. There's this basically pervasive idea that he's too old. He needs to stop. He needs to drop out of the race. And what my favorite thing I saw of the week was that an example of this was that he referred to Taylor Swift as Britney Spears at the pardoning of the turkey event.
Right.
Now, my take on that is he doesn't have to be too old to run for president to not be able to tell the difference between Britney Spears and Taylor Swift. I don't think that anyone over the age of 55 would probably be able to get it perfectly right every time. So I'm not even that old, and I could care less which one's which, right? It's just not my genre. It's not my thing. So I love that they are harping on this as a sign of mental deterioration when nobody would get it right. What are your thoughts? Was he really referring to Britney? Because actually, they're both in the news.
Yeah.
Britney she's still performing in Vegas. She just recently became a free citizen again. Like, she wrote a memoir, I think, is out now. Maybe he's actually more up to date than everybody else. Maybe he was making a little quip about both of them. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's two things at play, or three things at play. What's interesting is that the people who think that Joe Biden is too old are old people. I mean, that's kind of the demographic. And
that's interesting.
Because I'm in my 60s now, and I'm not physically what I was at 40 or physically was at 20. I think, mentally, I think I'm still pretty sharp. But as you get older, you slow down. And I think the older I believe the survey data is that the older you are, the more you think Joe Biden's too old.
Wow, that's interesting.
That's kind of interesting. Number two, the too old argument was used against Reagan in 80. That he was going to be too old at, I think.
What did he say? I will not use my opponent's youth and inexperience against him. Right? Wasn't that his line?
Yeah, that was when Reagan was 74. running for reelection.
Wow.
But the whole idea is that Reagan at 70 was too old. And there is a fair amount of research that the Reagan campaign did on if he's too old. And they found the best way, because Reagan was a public figure since forever. I mean, going back to the 40s and movies, for God's sake. And he had this kind of really antiquated hair. He had this kind of slick back hair. Which in retrospect is kind of a cool thing. It's kind of a cool SIG thing he had going on. But it was really kind of out of fashion. And he used to wear very conservative suits, which also kind of look, in retrospect, you kind of go, that's a good looking suit, where, politicians were trying to wear stuff it looks like a clown outfit now. But the Reagan people decided the best way to address his age was not to address it. They put him on a campaign schedule, that would put a 40-year-old reporter into the grave. And Reagan was sharp, and Reagan could do off the cuff stuff. Reagan did 2 debates, one against Jimmy Carter and one against John Anderson, who were both considered super smart. And he beat him in both, or at best tied him in both. But, he held his own. And that kind of all went away. And again, I also think that Reagan was in extraordinarily good physical shape at 70. I mean, he was a big dude. I mean, I met him a couple times for some filming. And the big shock about Reagan was how big he was in the chest. I mean, he was a massive dude. Yeah, I mean, he looked like a bodybuilder. He was that kind of physical.
Wow.
So, and then I did Bob Dole in 1996, who was also considered too old, and he had like Biden-like faux pas. And again, you have a lot of information in your head, and it's not a big deal. I think where Biden has done a disservice is that if his staff, and again, staff gives you all these things, and they give you little cards, or they give you, prompts and stuff. And because if you're president, you're on this 24-hour schedule, and you don't know who the fuck you're meeting. You walk into a room and they hand you a card and it says, you're meeting the ambassador to Luxembourg, and his wife's name is, Helga, and you go, Mr. Ambassador, how's Helga doing? You have a million things going on. And so, they send him out.
The only reason Trump never had those faux pas was Trump never talked about anybody but himself. He remembered his own name.
Right.
He could give a shit who he was meeting with, whether it was Helga or whether it was Pelosi or who it was. It was, we're doing this, Donald Trump is doing that. You know what I mean? Like, that was the brilliance of it, is that he talked about what he would talk about. You know what I mean?
Right. And, but I think that staffers, I always call politicians trying to be contemporary. I always call that granny in spandex. That, you go to a wedding and there's the otherwise attractive grandmother in the way too tight and way too modern outfit. And I think giving a politician a reference, to something they're not familiar with doesn't help them a lot. Because again, it's a stupid event. I mean, it was the turkey thing, right? Yeah. It was like the whole thing. You get out, you have clever names with the turkey pardon, and, we're going to pardon, death and taxes. And
I would have known that he's too old to be president if he had actually accidentally pardoned Donald Trump. That's when I would have been like, oh, this guy's lost it. He just said the Donald Trump instead of a turkey name. Yeah. Liberty and whatever it was. I think one of the turkeys was named Liberty.
So here is a horrible exercise that I will urge you to do and urge all our listeners to do. And I started doing that at airports. Because, you spend your life on airplanes like I did, and you've got a lot of downtime in terminals. And I remember picking up a People magazine a few years back, and I had no idea who it was on the cover. And I'm flipping through it, and so I had this thing, just to how kind of culturally out of touch you become very quickly, is that I would take a black magic marker, buy a People magazine, and I would put an X through everybody I did not recognize. And over the years, you become like, all of a sudden it becomes this kind of like, it looks like, and then I realized at some point it looked like the Notebook and the Kevin Spacey character in Seven, the Psycho Notebook and stuff. And then I realized it was a great way not to have anybody sit next to you at an airport and try to talk to you. You're just sitting there like Xing through these things. But again, I mean, it's information. But again, I think it goes to management of the president. Don't give him shit that he's not going to naturally do. Right?
Yeah, it's not in his wheelhouse.
You know, and
all right, we're going to wrap it up. Oh yeah, sorry. Go.
No, I'm saying it. It's and that's kind. And again, these are, by the way, I'm gonna loop it back to Fantasy Elect. I mean, if you're in a fantasy league and somebody's a White House aide, you would think, oh, he's going to kick the shit out of me, or she's going to kick the shit out of me. No, you're going to clock them because they're giving him Taylor Swift Twitter jokes. You know, when it's about the turkey.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. The last thing I wanted to do is, okay, for a new part of the show, what's going to happen next week? So we're going to try to predict the future, and it's a 50-50 odds over under this thing happens. I'm going to let you, I'll ask you the questions this time. Next week, you can ask me the questions. So over under 50-50 chances, more than 50-50 or less than 50, that this is going to happen. I got a couple things here. You ready?
Yeah, go.
Mike Lindell becomes RNC chair.
Under 50.
Under 50. Okay, cool. All right. The Tesla board hires Sam Altman as CEO.
Over 50. I like that. I'll do over 50.
Over 50. Okay, great.
Because here's the thing.
And the last...
If I read that, I go, of course they did, right?
Yeah. It makes perfect sense in a way, right? And by the way, if that happens, because that just came out of my imagination, I better get some stock options or something, because I'm the one that called it. I think that would be a great...
Oh, you froze.
Great. The last one, this is a little mean, but I saw a Twitter post about Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so anyway, over under 50%, Marjorie Taylor Greene creates her own reenactment of the Appomattox courthouse signing, targeting the original aggressors and declaring the South victors of the Civil War.
I'd have to take the over for that. Yeah, because it's so crazy.
It's so crazy it could just happen, right? I don't want to call her crazy. I'm just saying that would be crazy.
Let me give you one. Let me give you one.
Yeah, give me one. I'd love to hear it.
Ron DeSantis gets a meaningful bump in the polls in Iowa next week.
A meaningful bump. So I'm going to choose the under. I think that's less than a 50% chance of that happening.
Okay.
And that's a nice little dovetail. This is completely unexpected, by the way. The reason I don't think that that's going to happen is because one of our posts here, and I'm going to put it in the show notes, Nikki Haley at an event, she says to the kid, that's a nice hat, because the kid is wearing a Nikki Haley hat. And the kid responds, thanks, one of your guys gave it to me for free.
That's fabulous.
The kid totally threw her under the bus. It's one of my favorite things from Twitter this week.
That's awesome.
The last thing I would say is that this gentleman, and I'm going to give his name. His name is Sam on Twitter. Reposted by Nick Huber. It says grown men are wasting a ton of money in companies. This guy Sam says porn plus Uber Eats plus sports betting plus weed plus heavy drinking, insanely destructive habits. I would just like to say, fuck that. Sports betting, no. Fantasy Elect betting, yes.
Yes.
I wanted to add that caveat. All right.
Perfect.
Chris, it's been fun. Have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you next week.
See you next week, man.